Welcome to the Golf Coach Podcast, Grant. How you going, brother?
I'm good, mate. You?
I'm doing all right.
You're
I
looking
had
good. Looking good.
a little, mate. Do you know why I'm looking? I got my hat backwards. It's due to the fact that I just had a shower with the kids,
Yeah,
and my hair's not done. Really,
it's all right. It looks very cool. I like it.
does it look cool? All right, I'll take that from you, Grant. Hey, you got a jumper on this week. You didn't have a jumper on last week. How was Singapore?
Singapore was good. Good. As anybody that's been to Singapore knows, it's quite warm. When you look at the the temperature and it says 32, but feels like 43. And you're standing out in the middle of a golf course, walking around. I mean, it's a little uncomfortable, but you know what? I mean, golf was good. The boys did really well. Had a great week. There's some good crowds there. I didn't expect actually the crowds that they got. With that being so warm up there, but especially the Saturday and the Sunday, it was awesome.
Who have you got? Who played?
Who's your boy? So both Jed and Cam. So, two of the Ripper team. So Wade didn't get a start, but, hopefully at some stage he'll get a couple of runs. But, those two are doing okay.
How does that work? How does the teams aspect work? Or was that so Cam's a captain, right?
He's a captain, yep. And
did he have to decide the team at the start of the week? Like, how does it work? Start of the year, or how does it work?
Yeah. So So basically, he decides the team. So last year, obviously Mark and him both signed on last year, and Matt Jones was already there at the start of the year, and so was Jed and Wade last year, and he decided, to go with Jed and Matt this year, and it's good.
That's a hard conversation to have. That's something that we're not hearing, is it? Like, you got to tell one of the guys you're not. Not in.
And it was really hard because they had a great year together, and formed a really good relationship. And I think it's a testament to Wade's professionalism. Like, he, whilst he wants to be in that team and on the tour, he took a grade, and he's going to work towards trying to get back there. And there's a few different options for him to maybe get back into Liv. I think once you've had a taste of it, it's hard to not want to be there. So look, and that's part of what Cam's taken on, and he obviously chose to go that way. I think with Jed being a little bit younger and maybe looking hopefully towards the future, but nothing's for certain, and I guess we'll see how it all pans out in the future.
Yeah, I could imagine, because I thought those conversations might have been a little bit tricky. And Wade's one of your students too, right?
He is, yeah. So, like I said, I'd love to see him play. And I think, it's a shame he didn't get to play in Adelaide. It actually looked like he was going to play at one stage. Charles Schwartzel, I was watching him warm up on the range, and I could hardly move. And I'm thinking, Wade, you're in. Like, it's his home course. He's grown up there. Like, what a great opportunity. And then the next minute it's like, oh no, Charles is playing. And I thought, geez, what I saw is, he didn't look like he should be playing. And next minute he's 5 under through 10 and leading the golf tournament, and ended up finishing third for the week. So, he was obviously right to play, and, obviously it's his spot. But, when I was watching him, I thought, man, he doesn't look like he's going anywhere. He was hitting short shots and could hardly, swing through the ball. So, it was interesting to watch that you go from there. And then, they always say beware of the injured golfer, and, definitely looked like, because he's had his physio working on him, and, he was grimacing in pain, and, like he looked like he was in trouble. And then, Wayne had sort of done the warm up, and people were going to find him to try and tell him he was, just about to go out there. And then, it didn't quite happen for him. So.
And Wade's doing a little voodoo dance in the corner, and
I wouldn't say that. I think he's
of course.
He doesn't want to wish ill on anybody, but if somebody does fall ill, he's in the wings waiting, I guess. And it was a shame, especially late, because he'd had a lot to do with some promotion of the Live event there, and a lot of other things, and and he's been playing well. He won in Thailand about a month ago, and so he was ready to sort of go, but it didn't quite happen for him.
Was that the most populated event you've ever seen in Australia, in Adelaide?
By far. Yeah, especially spread all over the golf course. Like, if you look at a President's Cup, you've only got limited groups out there normally. So, like, just every fairway was lined with people, and it was crazy. obviously I'm biased, having some players play on that tour, but it was
Oh no, I'm
amazing,
into it.
amazing to watch. The diversity of the crowd as well. Like there was kids there with ripper hats and flags and all the rest of it. But then there was a lot of older people. Like I spoke to some people who were talking to some guys next to them. They asked them what club they remember at, and the guy said, "We don't even play golf." They said, "We just heard about
Oh
this
wow.
Live thing and we want to come and check it out." And he said, "This is awesome." And I spoke to,
Yeah, it's cool.
and I won't name names, but a sort of a guy who's been in golf in Australia for years and years and years, and probably more of one of the most traditional sort of guys you'd meet. And I said, "What did you think?" And he goes, "I think it's awesome." So
Yeah,
I
of course.
think it sort of transcended a big range of an audience, from people that had never been to golf to kids to older people that have been around
Mm,
golf their life. So I think just the energy that people got, and like I said, I haven't spoke to a person that went who A, wouldn't go again, but B, didn't love the experience. So no, it was very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. No, you don't have to sell me. People listening to this would know that I'm pretty big on I enjoy watching Live. I think there's definitely a place for it. Like honestly, there is a place for many more
Yeah,
tours in the
well, I
world.
think
Like we can
if you
host
like golf,
another four.
if you like golf,
Yeah,
watch golf. Like I mean, if you want
yeah,
to watch, and both, like it shouldn't be, pitted up against each other. They're slightly different products, and I think,
I
like you
agree.
said, they've got, you've just got more opportunity to watch good golf, and for the obviously for the countries that get a live event, I think, because a lot of those outside of America haven't seen that level of field.
Mm,
Like we've been fortunate to have some players come out over the years, whether it be Rory, whether it be Spieth, those sort of guys, but to have a field
yeah.
that included, I think, 13 major winners and, some of the biggest
Mm,
names in golf. I mean, we just don't get that here in Australia. So to have that, and hopefully to have that on a yearly basis, I can see nothing but good
be
coming from
sick.
that. So
I'll be sick. It's like anything. It's like when we go to like an Australian Open or whatever, and you look at the draw, and like let's face it, as like you might have like Leash, Cam, Herbie, Jason Day if you're lucky, and you're just trying to find them.
mm,
Like there's only four players on each side of the draw who are kind of that kind of
yeah,
same
and it
quality,
just
right?
costs us
In
too much
Australian
money
events.
to get the international players out here. When you're paying,
I agree.
$2-3 million for one player to come out for one event,
It's
whereas
crazy.
this, they're coming out as part of that tour, right? So yeah,
Mm,
it's just hard to fathom, why
sick.
you wouldn't want to, see all those players. And I think there's been a lot of been talk about, them not being competitive and all this sort of stuff. I mean, I think that's been sort of put to bed, with the way that a lot of them played at the Masters. And if you're in and around it,
100%.
those guys, if anything, I reckon are working harder. Like I see guys out there that are
Mm,
just, they're in the gym all the time. They're range sessions. Like we were out there, I think Saturday afternoon late, and DJs on the range working with Claude. Like they're flat out. Like and they're,
yeah.
like none of them are taking it easy. None of them are trying to, they want to win, right? And there's a fair bit at stake for them to
Mm.
win. So, yeah, I
Oh,
think that argument of them going soft and all the rest of it is not very valid. That's for sure.
yeah, I think people are just trying to draw on anything, right? But and you know what, that Masters, I think the next few majors, if I heard that Taylor's just had his spot pulled from the PGA. I was reading today, but if we can get in there, a few of the live guys, then they'll have probably a few more tournaments under their belt. Like that Masters crept up pretty quick in the live season, right?
Yeah, it did.
Like they'd only had a little bit of play beforehand, and for like Mickelson and Brooks to do that, I think was the best thing that could have ever happened.
Yeah, well,
Would have been great
it
if one
just
of them even
shows,
won it.
like you've got guys who have been at the top of the sport for a long time, right? Who are massive competitors. That doesn't leave you in 6 months. You know what I mean?
It's true.
Like I watch Phil. Phil is working as hard. Like you look at his body. Like he's working bloody hard to
Mm,
be the best golfer he is at 52. So
yeah.
like whether he's playing the best he's ever played or not, like that. may not be the case, but you can't knock their work ethic and their, like Charles Howe, like,
Yeah.
I've seen him for years, and like he just doesn't miss a beat. He works so damn hard, and like those guys are true professionals, right? So they're not going to just suddenly drop the ball in 6 months. Like, it's like for Cam,
Yeah.
like I obviously being on the inside know how hard he works, and like the money's not the reason. Yes, it helped the decision,
Yeah.
but it's not the main reason. There were so many other reasons they decided to, and one of it was to forge, something that they thought was going to be new and exciting, and the team aspect and all those things.
Yeah.
Like you look at Cam over the years. I remember as a kid, Cam got an invitation to play. I think it's Sage Valley in the States. It was the top 50 juniors in the world at the time. And,
Yeah. Okay.
so
Yeah.
Sage Valley, I think it was. Yeah. Anyway, the top 50 juniors in the world. And he chose to play for Queensland at Cabramatta Golf Club for an interstate series, right? Because he just loved playing team golf and he loved playing in that environment, So he chose to play an interstate series, right? And that's kind of, like the World Cups, the Presidents Cups he's played, he just loves that format. So, for him to be a part of a team and to have, some of his best mates there with him, I mean, like, it's hard to argue why you'd want to go, why you wouldn't want to go, that's for sure.
Mate, and I'll tell you what, if some of the players were being, might want to do the whole Liv versus PJ Tour bash-up thing, conversation, whatever.
I think the PJ Tour is amazing.
Times,
like, I mean, Cam, has got nothing, bad at all. Like, I mean, he was, on the PJ Tour for a long time. It's just that another opportunity came available, and, he saw that was a better opportunity for him at this stage of, where he's at.
Yeah, I agree. What I was about to say is that, like, some players on the PGA Tour, they're pretty tired. Like, you're reading about the schedule that just happened, play the Masters and then they've got to back up the next week. And, I think this year playing the PGA Tour is seriously going to be hard work.
Yeah, I think, from the outside in, people, you look at, they might have to play 20 weeks minimum or something like that. And it doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're doing it, it's a lot of golf. And, especially when you're preparing for those 20 weeks as you are, and then you try and have some downtime. I mean, the effort that those guys put into a week, I just don't think people appreciate how difficult that is. So to do that back to back for 2, 3, 4 weeks on the road, is hard work. Like, I mean, Cam came out the other day on Sunday and we're on the putting green and he's like, man, I'm really tired. Like, I'm really sort of like just, I think, the emotional high of Adelaide, and then, he played well, and just the heat and all that sort of stuff. Like, and he battled hard on the Sunday, but, you could tell he was struggling, and it's hard work. And you can argue they're only playing 3 rounds, but, you're also preparing for 3 days beforehand, and, all the rest of it that goes with it. So they're not, it's a lot for a lot of them. And, you see Rory, had a couple of weeks off and missed a couple of those elevated events. But, obviously he was in a state where he just couldn't play, and needed the rest, So it's an interesting dynamic where they're at the moment. So I'm hopeful that, it all works out and, everybody gets their piece of the pie, so to speak. And, it's good for everybody.
I tell you who I saw the other day at the airport. When I flew back from Bali and I was at Sydney International Airport, the airport there, and Harold Varner III was waiting for his clubs to come out of the. I was waiting for my pram, and he was waiting for his golf clubs. Anyways, I said to my wife, "Well, that's Harold Varner III. Plays on Liv. He's on his way to Adelaide, I'm assuming." And anyways, this guy next to us was there, had no idea who Harold was, and says, "Oh, what are you waiting for, man?" He's like, "Oh, I'm waiting for my club." He's like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "I'm going to go play some golf in Adelaide." And this guy's like just talking to Harold about all the nice wineries and which courses he should play. He's going, "Oh, you should go play this course. You should go play that course." And Harold's like, "Yeah, I'll check it out, man. I'll check out that winery. I'll check out those courses." I was just sitting there just laughing.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? With a guy like that, and to be fair, unless you're, in the golf, circles, you may not know who Harold is, but, he's a hell of a character, and, he's a good guy.
Speaks his
he's
mind.
a good guy. Yeah, he does. Yeah.
He's He's been floating around Australia for a bit. I remember a few years back actually when he was
He won the PGA.
contending in Event Australia.
Yeah, he won the
Yeah, he was
PGA.
contending in one, and he actually
I think he won the PGA.
He won the PGA. I remember. I think he was playing well too down in one in Vic, and I think it's when I saw Cam hit the best bunker shot of my life, and I think he just captain crumbled that day. Harold, I think he shot a few over the back nine, but he plays so fast, it's like he doesn't really care.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes when you're watching
I'll tell you what, you want to watch fast, watch Matt Jones, holy dooly. There's a few times you turn around and bang, off he's gone, and, it's amazing to watch Jonesy, just how quickly he gets in and hits a shot.
And is it just like he's obviously running through due diligence before the shot,
absolutely.
right? Or is it just when he kind of...
Yeah, no, he does, absolutely does. But then as he steps in, he just, he sort of steps in, puts the club in behind and bang, like it's so quick, It's interesting to watch.
I haven't really seen it. Like I think I've watched him a little bit, but never really seen it. But I've heard so many people just say, "Oh, fuck, sorry, I was talking when you're hitting," or something like that. Or
look,
like,
you're on the tee block and one of the boys will hit, and then you turn around, and the next minute, boom, there goes another ball, and it's like, Jonesy's hit again. So, but yeah, he doesn't muck around. That's for sure.
Hey, so did you take Coops to Adelaide? Did he love it?
He did. He come to Adelaide, and actually the whole family came to Adelaide and had a ball. Had an absolute ball. Yeah, Coop. He got to play Royal Adelaide while we were down there, and played Glenelg, and
nice.
So got a bit of Adelaide golf in, and which is great for us because we don't get that type of golf in Queensland. So he loved it. He got to play with Stephen Leaney for 13 or 14 holes at Royal Adelaide. Wasn't, knew he was a good player and that sort of stuff, but didn't know that, he'd run up in a US Open and, had the career he's had. And I said, "Oh, do you know?" And he goes, "Oh, not really." And I said, I'd tell him, he goes, "Oh, crap." It wasn't until after he'd left that he realised, the sort of career that Lenny had. And so, which was really cool for him. And then, like I said, he had a game at Glenelg, and then, had a really good week at the Liv event. One of the days was on the range with us and walked the 9 holes, so which was great. I love the fact that he can sort of be up close and see some of those guys and just exactly how good they are, and sort of use that sort of going forward. And since we've been home, it hasn't been a day that he hasn't had a club in his hand. Like the day after he got home, because I flew to Singapore, he went and played 36 holes. The very next day, and he's played like last weekend, he played every day, he just loves it. So it's pretty cool that he's got that environment to sort of be in and around at times, and to watch some of those guys, and it's very cool. It's very cool.
How's his game? Where's his strength? Where's his weakness?
You know what, without sounding like a biased dad, he's actually pretty good most places.
Pretty well rounded.
Yeah, there's no real weaknesses. I mean, obviously, being 14, he's got to get stronger and just play a lot more.
He's only 14.
He's 14, so really good short game. Hits it nicely, hits it really quite solid and quite straight. Doesn't curve the ball much, which controls his ball pretty well. So he's still learning the game. I mean, I think he's been playing properly now for about 3 years, and I think he's now down to 2.4 or something. So. He's heading in the right direction, and but the thing I love is he just loves it. I don't say a word now. He's just whether it be like this morning, I had a half-hour gap at 7:30. He goes, "Oh, Dad, can I have a lesson then?" And he was over there ready to go, and because I had a 6:30 lesson, and he was there at 7:30, for the half hour, and before I started, another one at 8, and and then he got home and he goes, "Oh, what are you doing tomorrow morning? Can we go over at 6?" And I'm like, so I mean, he's loving it. So it's very cool.
Is it? I imagine it'd be a little different. You're obviously just when you're working with someone so closely like that, right? You're just working the same stuff mostly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't try and coach him every time we're out there. I sort of sometimes, a lot of times I'll just sit in the cart and just be a dad and just drive with him and, watch him play and say nothing. And then other times, depending on what's happening, I'll step in and say something. But, again, I want him to come for me for questions, and the same thing, even like if he wants to go and play somewhere in the morning, I'll sort of, he has to set the alarm to get up and sort of get up by himself to, I'll always go with
Yeah.
him, but like he's got to be driving that. So, yeah, it works pretty well. I think because of obviously some of the guys that I coach, I think he understands
Mm.
that maybe I
Yeah.
should listen to Dad in this instance, and
Yes.
so yeah, look, it's good. He's really maturing a lot as a person and as a golfer as well. So, I'm excited for him because he just loves it so much.
And kids that are so hungry like that, right? And he moves the club really well. Like I've seen his golf swing. Like he gets, he's got nice width. He moves well, and it, I nearly feel like, I don't know, for the use of a better term, you're trying to stay out of their way a little bit as well, right?
Yeah, like
Like
I'm.
he could get to scratch with Dad not being there.
Yeah, well, like I mean, obviously, from the start, I've given him pretty good structure, so he's not developing things that I think are going to cause issues. It was interesting you talk about, like we had Michael Neff out from Gears the other day, so we ended up putting him
Oh yeah.
on Gears for the first time, and Michael was like, I've never seen a 14-year-old with that being that online and that neutral
Oh
before. So
really?
it was kind of cool to for him to see that feedback and to go like, so like I said to him this morning, like these are our things, mate. We've got our things we work on, and like they don't need to change. Like we just need to get stronger and get better at them.
Yeah.
So we're not going to
Yeah.
suddenly implement some new stuff later on down the track. So the good part with that is me being there more allows me to, I guess keep a bit more of an eye on it. So if it does start to
Yeah.
wander off, I guess, there's less chance of it getting to a place where it's like, oh, okay, it's a long way back from here. So it's probably one of the benefits of me being there more often.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand, and just keeping a close eye on it as well.
Yeah,
So tell me about Michael Neff. Was it? Did you
yeah,
say from
yep.
Gears? Is he Australian?
No, he's
Is he
American.
Australian?
He's American. So
And what, he was out here in Australia.
yeah, so he come out. We did a seminar up here, and did a little bit of data capture and a few different things with some players, and yeah, I think the gear system's great. I think there's a lot of amazing data when you can measure both body and club, and the
Yeah.
club's influence on movement as well. I think sometimes when we do 3D, we're looking at the body solely, but what's the club doing, what's the shaft doing that's causing the body to do the things that it's doing, right? So being able to see that and measure that is pretty cool. And then even from a fitting point of view, just understanding a little bit more about what the shaft's doing and how that influences relative to what the player does. So, it was a good couple of weeks, and I look forward to we're more than likely going to have a system, in the near future, and I can't wait to sort of again, like I'm not somebody that uses technology madly, but I think having it as a baseline and being able to check in and being able to keep an eye on certain things, especially with that developing golfer, just to be able to sort of, like I said, track them over an extended period, I think is very beneficial.
Oh, I love it. If I see any, I've never been around it, but I've like watched everything I can on Gears, and it's, to me, there's some really, you can create a baseline. So if we were explaining Gears to people, would you say it's just like you've got these kind of like little electromagnets kind of all on your body, right?
Yeah,
And it just tracks
different markers in it.
like your pelvis,
I think
sternum,
they tracked.
and
I think it was what 0.2 of a millimeter, which is about the width of a piece of
yeah,
paper, in accuracy.
yeah,
And like I said, just the measuring of what the club's doing, as well as what the body's doing. And I think, one of the things I like the most about it, is just the avatar they use. It's so user friendly. I think sometimes with 3D, when people are looking at graphs and things, they don't quite grasp exactly what you're trying to do with them. But I think just the way the avatar works, and you can put on certain markers and take certain markers off, and just show the things that you
yeah.
want and things like that. So I think from that point of view, and again, like I said, being able to test the equipment and how that influences movement as well is something I don't think any other company can do at the moment. So it's a pretty cool system.
Well, I've seen it, and I was even reading about it the other day about Victor Hovland changed coaches at the start of the year. And I won't mention any names, but he's gone to another guy, right, who's like the trackman maestro, they
Yep.
call him, and he's a bit of a tech head.
Joseph Mayer,
And Joey Mayer, yeah. When he was picking up, Victor always had this, got told from previous people that the reason why he couldn't chip is because of the leading edge, right? Because he's got that bowed lead wrist inflection.
Yep.
And people were saying the reason why you chip poorly is this. And apparently he just was like, well, hang on. Spieth chips all right. Morikawa chips okay. Dustin Johnson does all right. And they've all got this lead wrist inflection. Like, obviously it's not the reason. And, well, I'm paraphrasing here what I read, but anyways, he's hopped on gears and found out that his pelvis and his sternum was just kind of out of alignment. Like his sternum was leading the race through the ball, essentially. So coming into the golf ball, sternum, if people like talking about the buttons on your shirt, was slightly ahead of, say, his belt buckle, that was getting the leading edge stuck in the ground. Yep. And that's what was causing his chipping issues, because his pelvis would just fall behind him. And it was interesting that since he found that, he could just get the center of the pelvis to start to lead and measure it through gears, and all of a sudden the club was coming back out of the ground.
Yeah, well, we actually did a lot of short game stuff with Michael, and him and I are going to do a fair bit on the short game, because it's not something that they've done a lot with. And he was without talking it up, but he was really excited with what, because the way I teach short game, he was like, well, we don't really see that a lot over here, and wanted to know more. And he's sending me stuff this morning. He's like, oh man, I'm just chipping, it's amazing myself, and I want to measure this and I want to measure that. And so he measured a lot of the players that I coach, and so it's really cool. So we're starting to get some data around why I teach what I teach, and and sort of validating that, I guess you could say.
That's
so
cool.
yeah, it was really cool to have him out here.
It's cool to sometimes, like, I'm assuming that, you're getting some proof as well to why you teach works, and you're starting to learn more about it as well. Like, you've obviously taught this pre-technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've come up with this kind of thing, and now you've been told why you're doing actually works.
Yeah, and that's, that's where, like, I wanted that, I wanted that to go, okay, well, is what I'm seeing and thinking and, and coaching actually what's happening? And can we validate what we're doing and why it works, and all those sort of things. So that was another reason, why we got him to come out, and it was really cool. It was really cool.
That is cool. Hey, tell me, who were your coaching influences when you started coaching?
I had a heap. I used to watch a lot of guys coach. Back in the day, I was a junior at Caloundra, and Mark Gibson was the coach at Caloundra. He was the club pro at Caloundra, and Gibbo was a coach of mine. But I used to watch him coach, and I used to think that was really cool. Like I just see him down the range coaching people, and I so I didn't really he was a coach of mine. I didn't really watch him, once I started coaching, but just when he was at Caloundra early on, I used to watch him and what he did, and how he spent time with people and helped them, and and I thought, wow, that's really cool. And it's funny how I think that was one of the things that probably got me to coach. And then Peter Heiniger here on the coast, I used to go and watch. Yep. Jim Barden was at the QAS, early on. I went and watched him, and I remember, I went to the AIS and watched Mark Holland coach, and I went to different other guys, but one of the guys that actually probably shaped a bit of direction for me at one stage was Ramsey McMaster. So Ramsey was a golf physio here in Australia, and unfortunately passed away I think maybe a decade ago, sort of thing, and but was instrumental in bringing a lot of people together. And I remember Cam was maybe, it must have been, Cam was probably 14 or 15 at the time, and got to have a session with Ramsey, and it was organised through another person, and he asked, could I go down? And I was like, man, this is one of the world leaders in golf physiotherapy, like I'm there in a heartbeat. So I went down, and during the session he sort of asked me to put Cam in certain positions, and so I did that and talked to him about, what I liked and all the rest of it. Anyway, about an hour after the session, I got this email and it said, "Great to meet you today. There's a national camp in Moona Links next week. I'd love you to come. You can stay at my house. Um, let me know if you can make it." Went home to my wife and I was like, "I've got to go to Melbourne next week," and at the time, we didn't have the money for me to fly to Melbourne, hire a car and all the rest of it, even though I had a place to stay, it was,
Yeah.
but I just had to go, right? And so I went down and, Ramsey's there. And then that day, Stuart Leong was starting out with his stats program with shots to hole. And Stewie came over and, I remember talking like stats till midnight. And I think, Stu's wife wanted him home a lot earlier, and but we stayed there and talked stuff. And then at the time, Kevin Kirk, who's Patrick Reed's coach, was out from America, and I got to spend time with him, and guys like Peter Knight and guys that were involved in that program. And all of a sudden, Ryan Lumsden, who does the 3D stuff, like Ramsey sort of invited me into that world. And I said to him later on, I said, "Why did you?" And he goes, "You passed the smell test." He goes, like, "I asked you to do some stuff, and I've had a lot of coaches who, high profile coaches that couldn't tell me, what you told me, so you're in," sort of thing. And he sort of invited me, and that really sort of got
cool.
me,
That's cool.
I guess, access, or not access, not the right word, but just got me into a different group of coaches who were all sharing and all getting better. Like Marty Joyce, who was the VIS coach at the time, and just a whole heap of guys. Mark Bull, used to come out from the UK, does lots of, extremely smart guy, so all of a sudden you're having different conversations with these coaches, and like that's where a lot of my learning, so that was like, if I look back at a pivotal moment in my career, like I was already coaching good players and I was already coaching a lot of pros and a lot of young amateurs, but that kind of helped me really. And it was at a time where Cam was really sort of showing that, he was probably going to be pretty good. And, I'd made a decision that, I needed to go with him. I needed to do the work to keep getting better, to coach his kid. And, it was great for my career. And, like I just sort of tried to learn as much as I could so, I could keep coaching this guy that I thought was going to be, as he is now, one of the best in the world. So,
oh, mate, that's incredible. I've got a couple of follow-up questions on that. But on Cam, right, as you say, that is that I used to, do you know the name Taylor Cooper?
Yes.
He's from Queensland. Bit of right-sided guy, strange guy. He wouldn't mind me saying that. He's a friend of mine. Well, he was my trainee when I was at Manly Golf Club. Anyways, he was a flusher too, right? And I remember saying to him once, "You're from Queensland." I said, "This Cam Smith guy," when he was young, I was like, has he always just fucking dominated? Because I think it was like when Cam was just got to the PGA Tour, and then he gets a start at Chambers Bay and finishes like tied third in the US Open. And I was like, something like that, tied fourth was it? And I was like going, man, this kid, I just said, this kid just seems to just get to a stage and just go, yeah, no worries, I got it, move over. And he said to me, mate, he's been like that. He said, like, he was a bit older than Cam, and he said, I remember just playing junior golf and then playing state golf and all that, and just seeing Cam just continue just to kind of get put into a stage and just, I'll take it. I'll take it from
you're
here.
right. Like, look, I first started coaching Cam and had, when he was about 10, and, at that age, like, he was a good little player and, like, obviously showed promise, but it was about that, like I always say, that about that 14, 15 where he really started to, I remember him, I think he was 15 and he shot 66 the first round of a Queensland amateur, and he shot 29 the back nine around Pacific Harbour, and Pacific Harbour is not an easy golf course, right? And he's and he won the Queensland amateur at 16. I remember he beat Brett Druitt in an 8-hole playoff. He won Australian stroke play title at 17. He won it again the next year, and then he won the amateur the year after. So he just he won obviously an Aussie junior at 17. But about that 14, 15, he just started doing some pretty special stuff, and that's what I mean. Like at that time, I was like, oh, okay, this is different. I've coached some good players already, and I was still quite a young coach. Then I still think I'm a young coach, but 25 years into my coaching, so maybe more. But he yeah, he just had that something different. He was a competitor, and obviously wasn't a big kid. Obviously, didn't bomb at miles. Didn't just could just
Mm.
play and just could just compete hard. It didn't matter what you did. Like he was even at those early years. Like if he was in a chipping comp with kids that were 5, 6 years older than him, like he'd win a lot. So
I don't think that's surprising to the people listening to
no.
this. That's not
Look, and,
surprising.
and to be fair though, like his short game now is like, and if you get to see it up close, again, it's interesting. Like with that Michael I was talking about that was out with gears, and he come to Adelaide for a couple of days and just watched, and he was like, I knew it was good because obviously statistically it's good, and I've seen some of the shots he's hit, but until I stood next to it and watched it up close, I didn't realize how good it was. The sound, the flight, the way the ball reacts, like just the shots that he hits. He goes like, I've never seen anything like it, so which was really interesting from a guy that's around
That's
a lot of
cool.
good golfers and a lot of high level.
That's cool.
So yeah, it's and I obviously
Influenced it.
well, that's what I teach. But in saying that too, getting to watch somebody that is that good at it, like that you go, okay, this is what I coach, but also watching him execute it like that, and I think
Yeah, of
is an
course.
amazing, I guess, gift for me to watch how good it can be, and so. When you're watching your students, what sound wise and flight wise, and what you're looking for, and it, really I'm very thankful that I get to have a front row to seat to that as often as I do.
Pretty
Mm.
crazy. It's like, but tell me, when you went through this big shift in your coaching, and you felt like you kind of just, I'm going to say, went to that next stage where you kind of become that career coach, and you've just met all those amazing people. What did anything start to make a shift in your coaching? Did you go to more towards, getting away from the kind of generic one-on-one lesson with the recreational golfer? Did you go more into kind of planning with players? Did your preferences change? Like, did you just kind of just what went on?
To be honest, I think it's just organically evolved over the years. I think, I've always been
Mm,
pretty good at coaching what I know and what I believe in. I think a lot of
yeah,
guys get a little bit of information and try and run with it, and then realise, hang on a sec, I actually don't know enough about this to continue going with it. But I've always been good at that. But I think I've just sort of added, I guess, more buckets of knowledge to what I do, and I think having more solutions for people, to help them. I think for me, obviously I coach a lot of players, and I've spent a number of years now, doing squad work with the Queensland Academy of Sport and things like that. But I actually think it's really important to coach the average player as well, because and the club golfer, because
yeah,
for me there's a lot more problem solving, different problem solving, but a lot
yeah,
more problem solving. So when you get higher up that with that better player, you're looking at a lot of other reasons or a lot of other things for performance that are maybe not technical and not swing related. Whereas, I think
yeah,
working with some of the club golfers, and you've got, 4 or 5 things you're looking at and going, okay, well, where do I start, and how do I influence this player, with the least amount of intrusion, but also have the most amount of, you know, effect on them. So I think it's good for me to, to make sure that I still keep doing a lot of that sort of coaching, because it
yeah,
keeps the brain working properly. It's very easy, like I mean, I see Cameron Smith's swing in my sleep, right? So, it doesn't
yeah,
force me to look outside the box a huge amount, because like I know what works. We've
yeah.
got a blueprint we've had for a long time, and and we try and stick to that to the best of our ability. So, working with players where it really makes you think about it, I think
Yeah.
is great for my coaching.
Oh, mate, tell me about it. Like I can relate because still do some in-person coaching. I do about 15 to 16 hours a week or something in person. And I deal with a recreational golfer, and I have a few golf professionals as well that I coach, or like in some like elite players. And when you go like 30 handicapper into a golf pro, it's like having a lunch break when the golf pro comes, because the technical work with the tour professional, I think, it's the more you work you do away from the driving range with a tour professional,
Yeah.
isn't it? Like, like the stat collection, text messaging, performance stuff, have you got your course ready, the course map ready, where when the tour pro comes, it's like, all right, jump on the quad, let's check the
Well, and
numbers.
the thing for me
You look
too
pretty
now,
good.
with somebody like Cam, like we've, like once upon a time, it was caddy, psych, the whole lot. Whereas now, he's got a great caddy, he's
Yeah.
got a great psychologist, he's got a great trainer. Like I'm literally his
Yeah.
insurance with his golf swing. Like, like I'm,
Yeah.
so it's, and like we obviously have some good conversations and things, but like he's got a lot of people in place that are world class at what they do
Mm.
to make sure he operates. So again, my role has changed quite a lot over the years. Like, when he was a teenager, like I do everything. Whereas now, I'm just making
Mm.
sure that I'm, you know, he's swinging it and moving a certain way, and he's technically, and like I said, I'm more his insurance. Like we've got certain processes we've had for a long, long time, and if he's doing those things, generally speaking, he's going to perform pretty well.
Yeah, you got those kind of things in place, right? And then it's about just having the body ready and
Yeah,
the mind and body ready and
yeah,
being comfortable,
and
right?
like I said, he's got great
Tell
guys helping him do
Yeah, you go.
that. So, um,
Tell me about the your preferences or something that you might like to, because I mentioned this to you when we were down in Melbourne. I said something to you and you're like, no, I don't have any preferences. I'm like, well,
oh
hang on.
no,
I actually
yeah,
think
I
that
wouldn't say that I don't.
some of your players,
Yeah, I'm big
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
how we set our body. I think how we set
Interesting.
influences how we move. I like to see the body move in a certain way, and I think when you move the body a certain way, the club generally. So if you start with certain structure and move the body a certain way, the club generally swings pretty online. The club face is pretty neutral.
Mm.
So a lot of times, and again, just using Michael the other day when he was out, he said, "Do you realise how online and neutral your players swing?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I said, he goes, "Because man," he goes, "I've never, seen something that's this sort of neutral." And I think, but I don't really, get them to try and swing a certain way. But if they move in a certain fashion, I think a lot of those things take care of themselves. And so I'm big on, how the body functions and where the positions we put it in, and I think if you move athletically, without making this too simple, right? But if you've got a relatively
Yeah.
online golf club with a relatively square face with good body motion, it's kind of hard to stuff that up, So you know what I mean? Like, and I think too many times we're looking for all these, minor things. But again, for a lot of players, if you focused on those things, you're going to hit the ball pretty damn good,
Mm.
So,
Well, then it's kind of up to you to develop the skill, right?
yeah,
Develop the skill of your low point
yeah,
control once that's
yeah.
all
But
done.
again,
Like,
if you're moving properly and because, obviously, a lot of reaction through the body comes through what the face is doing, So if the
yes.
face is pointing in a direction that's not going to make it go at the target, guess what your body's going to do? It's going to
Yeah.
want to
Yeah,
compensate, right? So,
exactly.
I think and again, that comes back to how I start. If I start with good structure and I move in a certain way, then, I'm going to have pretty good face control. I'm going to have pretty good path control. And,
Yeah.
it's no different for me,
So,
even with short game, like I like to see the club really neutral and
yeah.
online. And even when we set loft, I like to see the club, I don't like to see it moving out and away and across and trying to, I like to set loft and maintain loft and, use the body to create, the proper pivot and, you know, um, and again, it just, the type of contact you get is so much more consistent. The flight control, rather than having 5 or 6 different types of ways to chip and pitch, it's like, if you move this way, I mean, a little bit of ball position change, maybe a little bit of lofted address, and but the motion is really very similar the whole way through my short game coaching. So, um, like I said, and seems to go okay most of the
And when
time.
you say the motion, yeah, when you say, yeah, of course it seems to be. I mean, all your players are guns. So tell me, when you say the motion, right? So you just, in particular, there, right? Let's just talk about short game for a
Yep,
second. There is that. Say that you wanted to change the flight of the
yep,
shot. You'll spend most of your time just adjusting the person's, I guess,
yep,
setup
yep,
prior, and then still move the same way. So
yep.
to try and do
Yep,
that.
absolutely. So think of it that
Eh,
basically, to
yeah.
again simplify it a little bit, but there's 3 main things that you're trying to control, right? Is quality of contact, loft of club,
Yeah.
speed of swing. Okay.
Yes.
So, how do
Yeah.
we regulate those things? So for me, I've got a way that I teach that, so again, if, let's take contact out of it and say that, okay, we're producing consistent contact. Really, it's just loft and speed. So what things do I do to
Yeah.
adjust loft? As I said, it might be a little bit of setup position, a little bit of ball position. I might, if I want to steepen the angle of attack, I don't, try and hinge the wrist anymore. I set the body in a position that allows, to steepen the angle of attack, and I maintain the same sort of radius. And so I do it through setup. And then, we're regulating speed through, pivot, and also a little bit of the tempo of the pivot depending on the shot, but most of them will have a very similar tempo to them. I mean, if we're trying to hit a higher, softer
Yeah.
one, we might increase, for a better term, the cadence of the pivot. But other than that, they're our variables, right? So the more I can, understand, those, slight changes and how that changes flight and spin. And, I just think it's a really simple way to be able to hit all shots. And, like I watch it a lot with, a lot of, and I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong, but, when you've got 5 or 6 different
Yeah.
types of, short game shots you're trying to play, and trying to get it good at all those is really, really difficult. Whereas, even, like for me, and again, not saying it's not right, because more people do this than don't do it, but I see a lot of people, whether it be hitting a flop shot or a bunker shot, getting really wide stances, right? And they do that to lower the center of gravity to get down to the handle, right? But the problem is then, from a motion point of view, you don't use your body the same way, so you've got to use a lot more wrist action, a lot more arm swing. So the angle of attack changes, which then changes how I shallow it. So all of a sudden I've got a different motion, whereas, essentially we create a little bit more knee flex, to lower the, to the handle, and then we use the body the same way. So, and
Because you're still tilted the same from the pelvis, right? You've just
yeah,
increased the flex of the
exactly
knees.
right, to lower
You
to the
haven't
handle.
actually changed your pelvis.
So we're actually still pivoting the same way. So, if you watch Cam hit a flop shot, he's not really doing a lot different to his normal shot, apart from a couple of little things, whereas when I widen that base, it creates a totally different technique that's needed. Now, for a good player, they've got good hands, good, awareness. They can do it really well. I just think it's a simpler way to, because I look at it and I think, like, I see guys, throwing the club head and all that. Yeah, and again, you can do all those things, but for me, loft is just loft, right? So how I get it is, whether I set it, and again, if you watch Cameron, like, you'll see he sets a lot of loft a lot of the time. So we work on setting it rather than trying to throw the club head or trying to, whatever, lean the handle back. It doesn't really matter, right? But that's just how we get loft. And, again, speed, we're regulating speed through pivot, so we're not trying to use more hand and arm motion, and, because it's harder to control and harder to regulate, what you're trying to do, right? So for me, that's, how we sort of go about short game. And, I just think, then the awareness to make those subtle changes to change flight and to change how the ball reacts becomes a lot easier.
Yes, and a lot of that stuff as well can come down to, with the player, like a little bit of intuition too, right? With a good player, like they, all of a sudden, like once you taught that baseline and they're going crazy about it, like they're getting up to a ball and say they want to see the ball get lower, they're already stacking their sternum more on
so
top
that's
of
right.
the
We'll
lower
get,
body
we might move ball position a little bit. I don't like to see ball position move around too much. We might set the sternum a little bit more left, which again obviously creates a little bit. I'm very big on depth of arc. In a golf swing. So,
heard you say that.
And so once we, if I need to steepen the angle of attack and get that club coming in at a little bit different angle, I'll do it with the body and keep the radius the same and keep the movement the same. So,
That's so cool.
and
I was,
so.
I felt like I pitched like when I played a lot. Obviously, I don't play anymore, right? Like I shouldn't say that. I very rarely play, a couple of times a year. But when I played a lot, I used to do my traineeship at Eleanor Country Club, and I just had all day, right? Just to play and practice what I did. I loved it, and I felt like I always pitched at my best when I was working very pivot orientated, and you do see like I control the speed. Like when you're talking about controlling speed, that if I wanted it to grip a little bit more, then I'd just move a little faster with that pivot
Exactly
through the
right.
ball.
Yeah, and because you're
Yeah.
maintaining loft, because the problem is if when you're using, excessive hand and arm motion for me, again, it's really hard again to deliver the club the same way. So you might get a little bit
Mm,
of drive with the grip and you get a little bit more forward shaftly, and all of a sudden you're delivering a little bit less loft with a little bit more speed, and the ball comes out a little high on the face, and all of a sudden it shoots off and doesn't spin, and like it's just harder
yeah.
to regulate, in my opinion. And for me, it's sort of developed over a long time where I've kind of been able to strip certain things away, and and like, to be honest, now I don't even really classify the different shots as say a chip shot and a pitch shot, and it's just a flight and a release pattern.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I want it to land there and
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's this loft, this setup, this ball
Yeah.
position, and this this pivot. So I'm not really looking at it as different types of shots. It's just, what does this produce when I have these sort of
Mm.
ingredients, so to speak. This loft, this speed, this is what the ball will do.
And is someone like Cam's in the pitching action? I've got it saved on my phone, right? Obviously on my in my stored
Yeah.
videos under short game, I've got a bit of Cam there. But is Cam, I guess, shut? Is his club face shut on the way back or closed?
No, I would say, are you talking about short game?
Neutral. Yeah, short
Yeah,
game.
no. So when he sets up, neutral,
Yeah.
the club face will match spine alignment. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, like I said, depending on, what we want the ball to do, he'll play a lot of shots where the club face is quite open. But, I'm not big on
Yeah.
trying to roll the club face open or trying to, but it's just his body's just
Yeah. Yeah.
turning back, and, the club's sort of, he's
Yeah.
maintaining that loft. Like I hear it a lot when people talk about using the bounce. To me, using the bounce should be a byproduct of motion, not something that you do, you know,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like I said, like,
It should happen as a
yeah,
result.
as a result of
Yeah.
the setup and body pivot. So we're not really trying to find the bottom. We're not trying to, like I said, it can happen
Yeah.
naturally. And I like to see sort of that, for a better term, longer, lower flat spot. Again, it gives you more room for
Yeah.
error. When you're sort of steepening that angle of attack too much, really hard to find the right sort of contact and the right ground interaction and things like that. So,
Because I remember talking to you about Cam's forearms when he putted, about how there's a little twist to the forearms through the ball, isn't there?
post impact.
Post
So,
impact is kind of like, to explain it. Can you explain it through the medium of
so
all?
basically, it'll look like the left wrist is kind of extending, or like the club head's sort of almost passing the hands a little bit. But what happens is,
Yes.
again, traditionally we were taught that you had to have a shorter backswing, follow through, all this sort of stuff. And a lot of the science now, you watch the best putters, they actually have a fair bit longer backswing than they do forward swing, right? So they're creating enough energy into the backswing to allow the club head to crash into the ball. Right, so it's like if you held
Yeah.
the putter up and you let it drop, it would swing through shorter on the through swing because of loss of momentum, right? And so if you're not adding any
Yeah.
extra force to it, it'll swing through and swing shorter. And then when you also have it colliding with an object, so the ball, it's also going to slow it down a little bit, right? So you'll see a lot shorter follow through, and it's not a deceleration.
Yeah.
It's just that's the club head swinging and just crashing into the ball. So the two main benefits of that is the club squares naturally, right? So when you're applying
Yeah.
force to the grip and, maybe blocking a little bit or whatever, as I said, you've got some face issues. But then the way the ball comes off the face is far more consistent as well, right? So because the ball's crashing, so as I said before, the club's crashing into the ball and the ball's coming off much faster. Whereas if you're almost pushing it through, it's almost like the ball's staying on the face that little bit longer and it's not coming off with the same sort of roll. So if you watch again with
Yeah.
Cam, you'll see, the putter head crashes into the ball and it's almost like just the energy just goes out of the putter and that wrist just sort of lets it just flow through, right? So, and, if you watch, I mean, obviously we know how good a putter he is, but if you watch his speed control, it's amazing, so very rarely does he, have trouble with controlling speed on the green.
Well, I asked you, the reason why I remember that conversation, I asked you about how he keeps the putter so low to the
Mm.
ground. Because, like, if when you watch Cam, his putter just stays so low to the ground through a lot through, like, just say from his trail foot to his lead foot. It's just like, it's just so low. And whenever I try to do it, I've kind of nearly got to have this kind of, like, my left forearm kind of
Yeah.
pronates in, my right forearm's got to
Yeah,
supinate to
look,
try and
he's
keep
not
that
trying
thing
to keep
down
the
low.
putter head low, like
Just
we're
happens.
just letting that putter head swing, and again, same thing, we spend a lot of time, you'll see when he lines up a putt, he's really diligent in aiming the face and aiming his body and squaring everything up. And, like when I'm at tournaments with him, like pre-round, we do a lot of mirror work. We do a lot of, making sure that everything's as square as possible. I'll watch him hit, I'll go around the hole with him and he'll tell me where he's aimed and I'll make sure that every putt's aimed, exactly where he's trying to aim it. So then, there's minimal, you know, he's not having to manage anything. He's not having to manipulate anything.
Yeah.
He can just swing the putter freely. And when he does that, arguably there's not many better, that use a putter than he does.
Well, I tell you what's crazy. If you look at it right now, like, you look statistically at Lucas Herbert last year, and then you have Cam, like, literally, like, two of the world's best putters are from Australia. Like, I'm not saying that they're both, like, 1 and 2 or whatever,
Yeah,
but like, Herbie's putting stats last
yeah,
year were, like,
amazing. Yeah,
insane.
absolutely. And
Like, he didn't strike the ball very well, but God, he could putt.
look, again, I think when we're comparing against the best at, certain things,
Oh, of
it's
course.
very easy to look like you're not doing a great job. It's like for years everybody's talked that Adam Scott's not a good putter, mate. Adam's an amazing putter, But when you
Yeah, of
compare him to
course.
the other best putters in the world, well, sometimes he doesn't look as good. But
Yeah.
like if he was putting, for most of us on a Saturday, like we would take Adam Scott's putting every day of the week.
Mate, it's like when you said before that Ken doesn't hit it a long way. I'm like, fuck
Yeah,
off. He
yeah,
smashes it. It's just that it doesn't look, it's not that long compared to the guys we see on
yeah.
TV, but
Like if you,
he's
yeah,
moving
he's
it.
hitting it. Like he's probably about 116 miles an hour. He's probably hitting it and gets a lot out of like he probably hits it bit over 300 yards, so probably 310 average now, and that's longer than average. And when
Yeah.
like last year on
It's
the
good air.
PGA Tour, like I think he ranked third in strokes gained approaching the green. He was obviously one of the best around the green and one of the best with a putter. So from
Yeah.
200 meters in, he's as good as, like, by far as good as anybody in the world. And so when we're in play off the tee, he's going to be
Yeah.
hard to beat.
Oh, mate, it's like, it's like Adam Scott. You don't win around Augusta if you can't putt.
No,
Like, come
he's
on.
he is a good putter. I think like I mean, you see it a lot where people go, oh, he's not, and you look at the stats and he's running like 40th on tour in putting. It's like, well, like he's a
Mate,
good
that's
putter.
gonna win some coin.
Like so, yeah. I said I'd take Adams putting any day.
Mate, it's kind of like I don't know. When you watch Scotty hit it, like, is it just flush city?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was lucky enough. He organised the game. Him, Jed, Wade, and Cooper played at the start of the year, and it's almost like I think sometimes he gets bored and tries to hit it different ways. But like if Adam hits his normal shot,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Like it's so good. At one stage he's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to try and do this and do that, and didn't quite execute. And I'm like, what are you doing, mate? Like like your
Yeah.
little fade every single time is just pure. Like it's, and I said something to Brad, his
Yeah.
coach, and it's like, yeah, I think he just, wants to be able to, do certain things. But it's like, if he just stuck to, his shot, it's incredible to watch. He just flushes it.
Do you think do you think it, like, it just proves to you as well, it just takes more, it takes more to, be like Adam Scott's obviously the elite of the elite, right? But to be like a dominant player, like it, and to win, it takes more than just being a good golfer, a good hitter, a good putter, a good iron player. Like, there's got to be something more in there, right? Because we've all seen Adam Scott's golf swing, and it's in all the posters, and you think that thing can't lose, right?
Well, look, the reality is to stay out there as long as Adam has and at the level Adam has, there's very few that can,
Yeah.
boast that sort of record. Like, I mean, it's hard out there. Those guys are really, really, really good, and so to be at the top of the
Mm,
tree for a long, long time and have the drive and desire to be great and, to keep working your bum off and, like there's some special qualities, for them to want to do that because, again, it does get past the stage where it's not financial. It's not about, they just love to compete and
yeah,
they love to, to challenge themselves to get better. And I think, those guys have got the true sort of growth mindset, right? Like they're so into just getting better all the time. They're trialing different things with
yeah,
equipment. They're always sort of on the edge of trying to, do certain things. And yeah, like I think it's amazing that, like I said, it was like Phil, like he's out there working his bum off. I remember I had um, one of the first times I went to America with Cam, was at Torrey Pines, and one on the Friday I saw Davis Love, and Davis Love at the time I think was 49, and he was heading to
beautiful.
the tour trailer, the gym, right? And he does a workout anyway. I'm sort of going through the scores later on that night, and Davis Love's missed the cut by 4 shots, and I'm like,
Oh, wow.
that's interesting. Like, he's missed the cut by 3 or 4, and he's 49 years of age, and he's going to the gym to do his workout, to do, exactly what he would do every other week.
Mm,
I just found it fascinating that, like these guys are so
that
well
is.
drilled and so, that it's just, this is what I do. And I'm always just trying to, be as good as I can. And, like I said, hats off to them because it takes a lot of commitment and effort.
Mate, like, you know what it's like when you hear people talk, right? And like, I remember working in the golf shop and someone come up to me and go like often question, right? Like, let's say the big events are on, right? So everyone's asking who's winning, who's at the top, which Aussies are going well. And someone might say, oh, whatever happened to Jason Day? And I just go to them like, my answer was always like, this guy was so
Mm.
good, right? And you got to realize that I just find that he's now got, I don't know, 17 kids, right? But he's got lots of kids, right? And you think about like their cup, right? Say you've got a cup of 100% that you can
Yep.
give, right? You might have your wife or your girlfriend, but you can give everything that you're thinking and doing is towards being that number one golfer in the world and, winning as much as he did. It doesn't matter who you are. As soon as kids come into play, there is time taken away from you, and your mindset is slightly
Has to be.
changed.
And,
Like you cannot run at 100%. And these guys out there, like these guys are so fucking good. They're at the 100. You slip down to
yeah,
90,
absolutely.
you're down to 30th.
Absolutely, and
You know what I mean? As soon as you know,
absolutely, mate. I couldn't agree more. It's they are so good, and there's so many guys chasing you. And like you said, if you're a couple of
yeah,
percent, worse off, just like you said, because you've got other things in your life, and
yeah,
and it's funny though, like if they're not winning, that's when people are like, oh, whatever happened to? And it's like, like obviously I read a lot of, certain things online, and like one today, talking about
yeah,
how,
yeah,
Cam's gone to shit since he's gone to Live. And I'm like, they've played 5 events this year. He's had a third, a fifth, a sixth in those 5 events. And like, that's not that
yeah,
bad. Like it's like just because he hasn't won, and like obviously
yeah,
last year he won 5 times,
yeah.
and it's hard to back that up. But you go, like I just don't know what people expect. I just don't think, like they really get how difficult it is to win out there and to be that good all the time. Like, and, and especially in a game where luck does
Mm.
play a part as well. And, um, it's,
But
yeah,
once a year, like I remember reading somewhere like Dustin Johnson won once every year,
yeah,
right? For like he was on this stupid
yeah,
streak, like a minimum once a year. And I think Scotty was on a streak like that
yeah,
too. Like we're talking once a
yeah,
year, you know,
yep,
and like, and that's a
yeah.
lot,
Well, I mean,
to
even,
win once a
whether
year.
it's,
Like,
the Live or the PGA Tour, but you look at it like Live now have 14 opportunities a year to win. And there's 48 guys,
yeah,
right? And,
mm,
the PGA
mm,
Tour have, they've reduced the schedule, but let's say 40 events, and there's 150 guys, and if somebody wins a couple of times like John Rahm is at the moment, there's not much room for too many
yeah, it's
others,
hot.
right? So, you're going to, like I
Yeah,
remember, who was it? I think it was it Luke Donald maybe or something like that, had won 6 times in 600 starts or something. And it
yeah,
was somebody like that, and like he'd had an amazing
yeah,
career, but he's winning one every
yeah,
100 events. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it
And and some of those guys, the courses don't suit them either, right? So they've got to get that opportunity when it
yeah,
comes.
you know,
And
and you might get a couple of bounces that don't go your way, and all of a sudden, like I look at last year with Cam, and like he had an amazing year, and I mean, like for somebody whose name wasn't Tiger Woods, you know, it's about as good a year that there's been, well, arguably till this year
mm,
with John Rahm, but you know, but three of those events he
yeah,
won by a shot. You know,
yeah,
so it could have changed really quickly, and he wins once or twice, and then you know people going, oh, you know, it
yeah,
wasn't a bad year, you know, so like the difference between an amazing
yeah.
year like that and an average year is not very much at all.
Mate, it's the same in the NRL at the minute. Like the poor old couple of teams have just, like the Knights have just been done like 1 point, 2 points, 1 point, and
Try
then
following the
they go on a bit of a
Dragons.
holiday and they cop it.
Oh,
Oh, mate, I used to be mad. I got a Dragons golf bag
yeah,
just there.
it's hard work. You know,
Mad for it.
I introduced my son into being a Dragon supporter just to, you know, create resilience and perseverance and to deal with adversity. And
Mate,
so,
Zach Lomax was hitting golf balls next to me a couple of the morning of their
yeah,
Bulldogs game, and he's just sitting there, just says hello and good luck this week, play well, mate. And then he gets dropped. What's
you
going on
know, and I
there?
find it interesting, like, you know, without going too much in it, you know, he's gone from being a right centre to a left centre, and all of a sudden, you know, like he's a guy that's got you know, a good left fend and plays on the right side, and all of a sudden he gets moved, and all of a
I
sudden he's
know.
dropped, and I'm like, okay, like you've moved him out of, you know, so
Yeah,
anyway, you know,
I don't. There'll be a lot of Illawarra listeners to this anyway because that's where I am,
yeah,
right? But I don't think Hook's got long to go anyway.
yeah,
Um,
maybe.
tell me. I got one more kind of question. I'm going to ask you just a few nuffy
Mhm.
ones. Tell me, you never wanted to be a tour coach. Like I shouldn't say that. Sorry,
No, yeah.
you didn't go down the route of running around on tour.
Look, when I first, well, even to this day, you know, my two sort of, I guess, mantras is, you know, that I want to help the person that's in front of me, and I want to learn something every day to get better at my job, right? So they're my two sort of things that I've always sort of lived by. And, you know, it just so happened that I got into helping a lot of younger players and a lot of, you know, junior golfers and elite golfers, and sort of went down that path. And but I never really wanted to be out on tour coaching five or six guys and live in that lifestyle. So, but it's interesting, you know, like that's sort of where I've ended up. You know, I've always sort of worked on, you know, that I just want to help the person that's in front of me.
Yep.
And then, you know, if I can learn something and get better at my craft every day, you know, that's what I'm trying to achieve. So, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, Cam or whoever, you know, I'm just trying to give them the best that I can. And, you know, I just ended up enjoying working with young golfers who wanted to, you know, forge a path and forge a career. But, you know, never really sort of thinking that, you know, I'd end up out on tour, you know, coaching.
Mm.
So, you know, I've never really been one to want to, you know, go, okay, well, I'm going to go out on tour and I'm going to coach five or six guys and I'm going to travel, you know, the world and do that job. You know, it was like, okay, I coach, you know, these players and I'll go and work with them. But, you know, I wasn't really actively seeking, you know, more guys out on tour to do that with.
That's yeah okay. And that's not going to change, right?
No, no. And if I, you know, either bring them through or, you know, there's a guy that, you know, I do want to work with, and yeah, you know, I'll go down that path. But, you know, I'm not actively chasing it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you've told me a couple of them how they just rocked up, like just rocked into your skill list, and you've just gone, "What are you doing, mate?"
Yeah, yeah, there's been a couple, but, you know, it's interesting, you know, so, yeah, you know, look, and sometimes, you know, you might have a short term relationship with somebody and help, you know, them somewhere, and others will lead to really long term relationships. Who knows? But you know, I just, you know, I want to help somebody whether it's for a little time or a long time, and yeah, that's all I really focus on.
How do you take it when a player leaves, or have you had many players leave? Should I say that? Like, how do you take it?
Um, you know, early on, I struggled with it. Um, because, you know, I saw it as a what, you know, and I still, you know, question why you know, why it happens and what I'm doing. But as you do it longer, you know, it's one of those things. It's just part of what we do. And some players will go and look for a solution, and if you're not giving them what they need, and you know, then it's their career. You know, I always say when I start with somebody, look, you know, it's not about me. It's about you, you know, and if you think I can help you, then let's keep going. And if you don't, then, find somebody you think who can, and I'm always there if they need help. I don't ever really, burn any bridges. I don't, go, oh, okay, that's it, never come back. I said I might help somebody a little bit. I might help somebody for a long time. It might turn into an amazing relationship. It might be something where it lasts a year. We don't know, but
Yeah.
I just try and help them the best I can, and if it's successful, we'll keep going. And like I said, everybody's got different reasons for coming in the first place, and then if they decide to go somewhere else, then that's up to them as well.
Yeah. It's interesting that, isn't it? It's kind of like, yeah, the initial conversations with good players. It's like, what do you want? What do you need out of this? Like, what do you
Yeah,
want?
and sometimes they're sort of coming to you as after being with somebody for a long time. The relationships I've had with the ones that I've had from an early age, I seem to they're the ones that stay, because you've created that trust and that bond from an early age. The ones that sort of, might have had 3 or 4 or 5 other coaches and are looking for something different, sometimes they're the ones that maybe keep searching and, might not hang around as much. And, but yeah, you know what, like I said, I just try and help, and, if I can help, then, that's all
Yeah.
I'm trying to do.
It's interesting as well because I find as a coach as well, like, especially early on in a relationship, I feel like you give more than what you're being paid for, right? Like emotionally or help wise or
Yeah.
communication
Yeah.
wise, like setting down that baseline with a new player, I don't think is, incredibly rewarding in the pocket, right? It's a lot of time out of,
Yeah.
phone calls and
Yeah.
this. And then when they just take off, you're like, oh, we're just getting started,
Yeah.
we're just getting
Yeah.
started.
Yeah. And like, it's interesting, I've had a couple of times where, players have been going quite well, and, they'll want to do something else. And, like, I want them to do well, and, but, you go, oh, okay, why was that? Like, it's weird because you think, you've made massive improvements, you've done this, like, but, as I
Comes
said,
with
we have a heap of other influences. There's other people around them that, maybe influence their decision to go and do other things, and who knows, but, like I said, I used to worry about it a lot more in my early coaching, whereas now I just see it's part of the job. And,
Yeah,
generally if they've come to me, they've usually come from somebody else. And,
it's true.
so, like
Call
I
that,
said,
call that
it's,
person up. Call that person up and have a
yeah,
cry.
yeah, well, like it's just part of the gig, I guess,
Hey, tell me if you were to play your dream four ball, but they can't be golfers, who would it be?
Dream four but can't be golfers. Well, it's a bit hard. My dad used to play golf, but I wouldn't class him as a golfer. He wasn't very good, but I'd love to play with him again,
Yes.
which unfortunately won't happen. But
Yeah. I
let
heard
me
about that.
think. I haven't really actually thought about non-golfers as playing partners. Something like a Kobe Bryant. I think Kobe Bryant.
Wow.
Like, I find him. Obviously before his tragic passing. Just the way he looked at things and the way he was just so. He'd just done the work and believed in
Mm.
himself, and didn't see any reason not to, because he was only ever doing what he'd trained to do, sort of thing. I like those sort of guys. Mate, to be honest, it's a really hard question.
What about Kobe
Never really
Bryant though?
thought.
Geez, we learnt a lot about. Like, I learned a lot about him since his passing, obviously, right?
Yeah,
Like, you see all the
absolutely.
videos come up and all the quotes and of him talking, like every day you see them come
Mm.
up. And I didn't realize, I just always thought it was just Michael Jordan and no one was near, but man, he's in the
Yeah.
same breath, right?
Well, I just like those guys that one of the stories he talks about, being 13 and 14 and going to these basketball camps, and all these guys are trying to get recruited for college and all that sort of stuff, and Kobe's out there working on the things that he's not very good at, and he said nobody really paid any attention to me as a 13, 14-year-old. He goes, but as an 18-year-old, they all wanted me because now I'd developed these skills that,
Mm,
that were going to transcend, where all these other guys were after the quick, short-term things. So I always like that slow burn guy that,
interesting.
just keeps at his craft and just keeps getting better and better and better. And, so they're the sort of people I really like listening to. I like listening to people who, I guess with the current situation of the world, are happy to speak up and potentially lose everything even though they're speaking for what they believe is the greater good. And those are the sort of people I really admire.
I saw a
A
video
lot.
the other day of Djokovic. I saw the video
Yeah,
of him
potentially.
today.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Like they just they have a belief, and whether everybody believes it or not, this the fact that they're prepared to stick by that belief, I think is really important. And like I'm not massively into American politics, but you see some guys now sort of sticking their neck out and trying to and I like to listen to those guys, whether I agree with everything they say or not. That's
Yeah.
another thing. But I just love watching people who like I said, potentially have everything to lose, but still stick up for what they believe in. So
I like that. I
yeah,
like that. I like that a lot. I mean, I saw the video the other day of Djokovic, and this guy was interviewing him and said, sticking up for what he believes in. He said, you can't go play, potentially couldn't go, I'm paraphrasing again, but couldn't potentially go play the French Open. And the guy said, you're giving up the chance to be statistically the greatest tennis player of all time. And he goes, yeah. He goes, still, you'll still do that if you can't go to another major. He goes, if you can't play another major championship again, would you still do it? And he goes, yep. Like he was just that.
Yeah, and you've got to admire those people.
Yeah.
I think anyway. Look, and people won't agree with what we're saying, but like to me, and yeah, like those guys just stick by what they believe, and
Yeah.
they're not swayed by whether it be money, fame, whatever it might be. They just truly, this is what I believe, and I'll stick to that, 100%.
All right, tell me what's your favorite takeaway food?
Takeaway food. Probably like a bit of Japanese, bit of sushi, bit of karage. If we're going really average takeaway, probably Kentucky.
The bird. The bird. How good is
The
it?
bird, yeah. I think it's a bit of chicken and chips. And
Do you know, when I first moved to Manly, I was living in DY, just outside of Manly, and I moved right next to a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I was staying in this place. My friends used to call it the Cubby House. There was no kitchen, so I just had Kentucky Fried Chicken every night next door. Young and dumb, right? 18 or 19, whatever it was.
probably get away with it,
No, but I didn't. It came on.
Yeah.
It came on.
Yeah, okay.
I put on 10 kilos, I reckon, by the time I next saw my parents. My dad said, what's going on? I was just like, blew up. And
I
he said,
live next door, Kentucky.
yeah, and I said to him, I just get Kentucky every night. I didn't know anything about nutrition or nothing. I wasn't taught it. I should, didn't taught it. I didn't understand it, and I thought chicken was all right, And anyway,
well, it is if it's not covered in some of the other stuff.
Yes. So my parents were like, "Oh, we've got to sort this out, mate. We've got to teach you how to look after yourself with your food." So, mate, the bird's a big weakness.
Yeah,
Mate,
yeah.
that's mate, I've really enjoyed this, mate. I appreciate you coming on, and I know you work stupid hours. I can't believe you're coaching at 6:30 in the morning. What's going on there?
Just one of the young kids that needed to go before school, and they do every second Thursday. And look, again, I think if you're going to take on especially good players and good young players, I think it comes with a certain commitment, and like they can't turn up at 2:00 on a Tuesday afternoon when it suits me, or so like if I'm going to say yes to coaching them, then I need to work in with what they can do as well. So yeah, that's why I was there at 6:30 this morning. And
can people Pelican Waters? How far away are you from the Gold Coast?
Gold Coast, about 2 hours, about an hour and a bit north of Brisbane.
Oh, okay. I'm going to the Gold Coast end of this month, so I just want to see where you were.
You should come up. Come for a drive.
I got to go to a wedding. Well, I don't have to. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
So tell me. So can people get lessons from you? Can this?
They can. They can. I have not a massive amount of availability, but they can. Yep. As long as I know, far enough in advance, I can generally fit the odd one in. So
fit the old one in, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I have a lot of we get a lot of listeners, Grant. This is like the #1 golf coach podcast, like one of the #1 golf podcasts in Australia. How's that?
Really? That's amazing.
I know, mate. How good's that? Hey, it's
the
#1.
You're killing it.
Mate, it just started getting lots of people listening to it, so I thought I'd better keep recording these things.
Yeah,
but
you're doing a good job.
we have a lot of good people who listen to it, a lot of good players, a lot of good coaches that listen to it. And I'm assuming, if a coach's got a question or something, they can probably flick you a message on Instagram or something or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy for people to come and shadow, and I have a lot of guys who travel and will come and watch me for the day and things like that. So if they, if there's some golf pros that would like to come and do that, they can. And like you said, if they've got a question and I can help, I've always been really fortunate to have good people helping me, and I feel like I'm more than happy to give back. And if there's something that they think that they can get out of, watching me or listening to me, I'm more than happy to have them there. So.
And are you still doing any online lessons? Are you still doing the Skillest? Are you checking the Skillest account?
I'm trying to. I get a little bit behind, if I'm really honest, just through time. I try and do it, but I think one day I'll do a lot more of that. Just for right now, it's I've just got a lot on, and I find it a little bit more challenging to, because I probably need to set aside a bit more time to do it. But as I said, I think it works really well. It actually exceeded my expectations, and obviously you do a lot of it and do a great job. And but like I originally was like, but it's a really effective way to coach, and I think definitely something in my future where I'll do a bit more of it. That's for sure.
There's a place for it, Grant. Exactly. And when you were talking before about time, like. Seriously, I know what it's like when you're a busy golf coach. Like I do limited in-person stuff now myself, but to fit it in, it's one of those commitments there you can't people think, I can just do a little bit on the side here and there. You've actually got to spend some time on it. And
we use the terminology, you can't be half pregnant, right? You're either in or you're not. So it's one of those things that, you either do it properly or, like I said, I think a lot of people go, I'll just do a couple of weeks. And it's like, it doesn't work like that.
No,
So,
it's like, And people like, a lot of my students say, you got back to me so quickly. And I go, yeah, well, it's work day. It's what I do.
That's
at
what
work.
my job is.
It's like,
right.
Some coaches will leave them sitting there for a long time and not get back to them because they're trying to earn a little bit of side hustle money or whatever. But no, it does take a big level of commitment for sure.
Yeah, absolutely,
mate. I appreciate you coming on, Grant. It was good fun.
No worries. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, brother.
See ya.